Version of Chip Talks. We're going to talk about cancer today. We're going to go deep. We're going to talk about it in ways you've never heard it talked about. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk about things that you can do yourself through diet and behavior. And we're going to talk about hard, big effectors of cancer. So I'm really happy to bring this to you guys today. I couldn't get that out for some reason. But today's show is sponsored by FECO Playbook. It is sponsored by Operation Zero 2.0, which is happening here in Oklahoma. Both of those are efforts at cancer. If you have cancer or love someone who has cancer or recovering from cancer, if cancer has touched your life, you're going to want to know about FECO Playbook, and you're going to want to get involved with FECO Playbook. FECO Playbook is a national effort to stop cancer in its tracks, and we're going to win, boys and girls. We're going to beat this thing. So we're going to talk, and as always, we're brought to you by Neighborhood Nutrition and Clinic. That's where I'm broadcasting from today, our secret location in Ada, Oklahoma. And we offer True Medics nutritional supplements, so they are weapons in this fight against things like cancer. So here we go. Should be fun today. Oh, my graphic. So sorry about the graphic. We still got the blood graphic back there. We'll just jump right into things. That way we're not so graphic constrained. Okay, so we're going to talk about cancer today. By the way, just as a disclaimer, so I'm not suicidal in any way. I love my wife in my life. My wife and I have a very good relationship. We like our new situation here in Ada very much. We're very, very happy. So before we get into this, I just want to leave you with that disclaimer. So let's dive right in and talk a little bit about cancer. Well, the first thing to know about cancer is that it's a business, okay? So you have to think of cancer in terms of a business model. So it's $100 billion business model. Now, if you're an evil rat pharma bastard, all right, and you don't have any ethics, it's, again, not in your best interest to solve cancer. It's not in your best interest to fund cancer research. And if you do fund cancer research, again, it's not in your best interest for that to culminate in any kind of conclusion. So we all wait for medical science to solve this problem, right? Researchers are researching cancer and medical science will solve this problem. And well, there's a lot of research out there and there's a lot of information about cancer, but yet no one is working on solutions. And there's more than enough information out there to come to the same conclusions that you'll get to, that I got to, through the course of this kind of presentation. Okay. So, it's kind of bullshit that there's no cancer treatments, let's say. There's lots of cancer treatments. Okay. And we're going to talk about those. There's lots of ways that you can help yourself either prevent cancer from ever happening or to address cancer if you have it. And we're going to talk about those. Okay, so again, $100 billion, though, that's what the cancer business is worth. And again, you just have to think of people's ethics and are they really going to, come up with a cure that gets rid of $100 billion in sales. You would hope that they would, but again, based on what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, I don't think it's going to happen, boys and girls. I think we're left on our own. We got to do this on our own. So cancer kills about 7.4 million of us a year. 1 in 3 of us, 33%, will develop cancer. So, I've sort of taken on autism as a personal mission. That's at 2%. Cancer is 33%. All right. It's a big deal. If you want to know what kinds of cancer, mainly we're talking about, it's over there on the left in the graphic. Lung cancer is a biggie and breast cancer is a biggie. And the rest of them are also biggies, but those are kind of the major ones. So let's talk about those a little bit because they're kind of different, right? So cancer is different, and cancer is different depending on the tissue that it's in. Cancer is a disease of the soft tissue, so it likes soft tissue, like kind of soft tissue, right? So like lungs and breasts and things like that. So this is kind of the progression of cancer in the lungs, and you'll notice that again it moves around, and it'll move around through your body, but it doesn't really do something as dramatic as breast cancer, and it doesn't metastasize, but it kind of does in its own way. But it's more of a, let's say, localized cancer. It's not going to be systematic. It's not going to affect you in a bunch of different ways. Something like breast cancer, or when cancer metastasizes, what that means is that cancer basically moves, and you can see that in the green arrows there. This is showing lung cancer is metastasizing, of course, but it doesn't metastasize quite in the same way breast cancer does. But these cancers move around. So, they are looking for an opportunistic host. Once they find a host, they're going to set up their little fort, their little home, and they're going to do what we all do. They're going to try to reproduce. And as they try to reproduce, they move around. So they're able to move around. But this is, and by the way, and I'll, talk to you guys about this, but cancer is alive. Cancer is a, bacterium, virus, fungus, however you want to look at it. But cancer is a living thing. And that is a very important distinction that, medical science hasn't made yet for whatever reason. But there's no question cancer is a living thing. And it just by virtue of how it reproduces here and wants to move around, it's not like your body's doing that. Hey, I think I'll move cancer to my brain and to my bones and all that. That'll be fun. No, sorry guys, your body doesn't work that way. God is a perfect engineer. Your body is always striving toward perfect. If you're not perfect, then you're infected or traumatized or, insulted, let's say. Something's going on. But again, your body just doesn't decide to move the cancer around. This cancer is alive, and as it grows and progresses, it moves around in your body. Breast cancer especially, but all of these cancers will kind of move around in the body. So why and how does that work? Well, think about this. In order for a cancer or anything alive, like a bacteria, to set up a little fort inside of you, it's got to have food. It's got to be able to defend itself from your immune system, and it needs to be able to reproduce, right? So how does that work with cancer or kind of these bacterial infections? Well, it works through a metabolic hijack. In cancer, it's something called the Warburg effect. This guy named Otto Warburg in the 50s, he noticed that all cells, by the way, so real quick, so cells will run on glucose, fats, or light. Those are the three kind of states of how a cell will run. There's a weird anomaly, and this was something called the Warburg effect that this guy named Otto Warburg noticed in the 50s with cancer cells. And that's most cells, how they flip sort of between these states. So all cells will run on glucose. So if you load up glucose around a cell, it's going to fire up and it's going to run. If you give that cell fats and you put it in the presence of oxygen, it's going to switch and it's going to become way more efficient and start burning fats and running on fatty acids, oxidative phosphorylation. And that's a way more efficient way to run a cell. Well, for some reason in cancer, the cancer hijacks a cell, and this again is another just indication that cancer is alive, but it hijacks a cell and it changes the metabolic situation of that cell to be not efficient, right? So kind of like running on glucose, but worse than running on glucose. So it's this state kind of in between glucose processing and fat processing that even in the presence of oxygen, these cells want to run on glucose, okay? And it's super inefficient, but it looks like a way that your cells, when you're proliferating cells, they sort of go to this mode because they can do things really, really fast, even though it's inefficient, and they don't have to burn fats, while they're doing it. They can use the fats for other things like amino acids and junk like that. So anyway, it's advantageous to the bacteria, it's advantageous to the cancer to hijack your cell and change the metabolic situation of the cell to be this thing on the right called the Warburg effect. Now, what does that do? If you notice the arrows on the right, well, it basically, the cell is still, so a normal cell on the left is running on glucose. You can see that up at the top, glucose coming in through the glut receptor that makes pyruvate and lactate. Lactate gets recycled within the cell. And then sometimes that pyruvate goes on to be fatty acid processing. So you can see on the bottom left, the fatty acid processing is 38 units of ATP. And the normal sort of no oxygen sugar running is 2 moles of ATP. So you can see kind of the efficiency of what's normal is. So anaerobic glycolysis is sort of what you normally do just in the presence of glucose. Again, if I give you oxygen, you've got fats, then you're going to oxidative phosphorylate. And that's what, 17 times more efficient. It's even more efficient than that in some cases. So that's normal. Abnormal is, again, cell, even in the presence of oxygen, he still stays over here and he wants to run on glucose. Now, the other abnormal thing is these cells produce a lot of lactate, okay? So lactate is something that's in milk, but lactate is also an output of cancer cells, and lactate is an acid, lactic acid, and so this changes the pH around that cell, and the pH becomes a lot more acidic around that particular cell that is under this kind of hijack. So what else do they do? Well, again, so this is the way that they sort of set up their little food home, you know, so they hijack this metabolism of cells where they'll eat glucose and glutamate. What else do they do? Well, they have to hijack your immune system, otherwise you're going to kill them. I mean, you've got a protein that we'll talk about in a little bit called P53 that will kill cancer. Yeah, you've got 2 ways to kill cancer, both of which you turn off when you eat, but we'll talk about that in a second. But you've got lots of ways to kill cancer cells, and you've got lots of ways to tell those cells to die, to kill the insult, let's say, to kill the bacteria. Got lots of ways to do that. So, but in order for me, if I'm a bug, if I'm a bacteria or a cancer cell, in order for me to set up inside of you, I've got to hijack that, right? I've got to be able to fool your immune system or break your immune system in some way where you don't kill me. And that's exactly what happens with cancer and other bacterial infections, is they hijack basically our immune system. So I want to compare, and I want to just sort of get in you guys' mind that cancer infection and a bacterial infection are the same thing. Okay, so this is bacterial metastasis, and what happens, and I think this is Leishman's disease. But what happens, again, you can see all of the different things that are systematic across the body that happen with this infection. So not only does it affect, the site of the infection, it's going to infect the bone, it's going to affect the immune system, it might be lungs, it might be liver, it might be gut, but there's going to be other stuff involved, and all of this will affect the brain, okay? All right, so that's just a little groundwork about kind of what cancer is. We'll circle back to that in a second too, but what causes cancer? Well, so a couple of things, right? So cell mutations absolutely cause cancer. Now, in the way that you work, God is a really cool engineer, right? So God, we're engineered to sort of live and be alive and be most efficient. We're always striving towards sort of this perfect function, which is really, really cool. And all of our cells are striving toward that. Well, what happens if I, zap you with an X-ray or give you a piece of lead, or, you smoke? Again, smoking is bad, right? Or you breathe in someone else's smoke, or you breathe in some toxic fumes. What happens? Well, it's highly probable that cells will be mutated from those events, right? And so we're constantly have, situations that we're dealing with. Again, God's a perfect engineer. It doesn't happen inside of you just because. It happens because of some stimulus that our cells can mutate, okay? And so when our cells mutate, again, we've got 2 ways to clean that up, both of which we turn off when we eat. So if we're eating too frequently, we never have a mechanism to be able to clean up mutated cells. And so we can get a second mutation, and we can get a third mutation. It generally takes 4 mutations for a cell to become cancerous. That's a lot. That's a lot of sort of time without cleanup. But if we eat the way that most of us eat, this can happen. And again, this should never happen the way that we're designed. We should never get to a fourth mutation of a cell, okay? But yeah, we do. All right, well, what else is kind of interesting about cancer? Well, is cancer consistent and common? Meaning, like, if cancer is really a mutation of the cells, then something with a whole lot of cells, like a whale or an elephant, should have way more cancer than I do or a mouse does, right? So it's just, if it's consistent and common, that's the way that it should be. Well, it turns out that that's not what happens. Whales and elephants and things like that don't have the incidence of cancer that they should have based on the amount of cells that they have. We have a higher incidence of cancer. A mouse has a higher incidence of cancer. And that's because cancer it's not just about the mutating cells. It's about your immune system and how you deal with the mutating cells. And that's the important nuance. So we all have suppressor genes, basically genes that are associated with if cells are going to mutate. Again, we're just going to be around stuff in our environment where our cells mutate. Well, we all have these genes that will come in and kind of fix those things. And in particular, we all have a gene called P53. And P53 is our tumor suppressor gene. It's our cancer killing gene. Okay? So, important gene. We only have one. Okay? So we only have one really big tumor suppressing gene. Something like an elephant has 20. And that's why they don't get cancer at the rate that we do, because they've got a lot more sort of cleanup situation. They've got a lot more cells that could mutate, and so they've got a lot more situations to clean that up. We, on the other hand, just have one copy of this gene. So if something, blocks this genetic expression of P53, then we're super susceptible to cancer. So does that happen? Well, yeah, and again, here's the research to kind of prove it. So on the study on the left, this mouse, they can genetically alter mice where they don't have the genes to be able to express this protein. And so that's the P53 minus. So those guys don't have any way to kind of express this P53. The plus minus, I believe, are offspring from the minus that are bred to ones that do have. But anyway, look at this. So, if they don't have this P53 gene, the average time to tumor is 4.5 months. I mean, that's pretty fast. If they're sort of offspring of this, then it's 18 months. But again, you're way more susceptible to cancer. Way, way, way more susceptible. See the study on the right, P53, the most frequently altered gene in human cancers. So again, if I'm cancer, I'm not going to want this gene running. I'm not going to want you to be able to kill me. I got to be able to alter it. I've got to be able to alter this gene where it doesn't produce P53, or I've got to be able to shut down that mechanism where it doesn't kill me. And cancer does that. Again, another indication that it's alive. So could something inhibit P53? Yeah, again, you can go satisfy yourself that this certainly can happen through bacteria, because there's lots of studies out there, but I just cited a few of them here. Microbial regulation of P53 tumor suppressor. Is P53 present in bacteria? Bacteria inhibit P53. Block it. Stop it through multiple mechanisms, including protein degradation, transcriptional inhibition, and post-translational modifications. One particular mechanism that may be targeted by bacteria is the P53 DNA damage response. Inhibition of P53 may allow bacteria to subvert the host cell cycle control and apoptosis mechanisms. That's how you kill cells, resulting in inhibition of cell death and survival of host cells damaged by infection. They jump our P53 gene. All right, Royal Rife. So I've talked about Rife before. I've done another cancer one. So it's not quite this deep, but I did one back, I think, in October, where we talked quite a bit about this. And I went into a little bit more detail, I think, about Rife than I will here. But Royal Rife was a layman. He knew that cancer was super small. He built a better microscope. He actually found it, and he identified cancer. And again, I call them all bacteria. He called them a virus. Bacteria, virus, fungus, doesn't really matter. These guys are in there, but let me read you this real quick. Just the culprit of cancer, or at least a new possible cause, had thus been uncovered. It was a tiny ovoid particle about 50 nanometers large and 70 nanometers long. So it's super duper small. And this is why it's very hard to identify, this bacteria that's associated with cancer. It takes a special type of microscope. And guess what? For some reason, we just don't seem to want that microscope out there in diagnostic testing for whatever reason. Its motility indicated that it was flagellated. So what that means is it can move around. Rife also observed with his super microscope that these bacterial, basically cancer entities, could be transformed again into bacteria or fungi according to the medium where they are living. So they could sort of go back in a kind of a nascent state, or they could go into an active state, just depending on the situation. In their reduced form, so when they were nascent, when they were kind of hiding or asleep, let's say, they could not be killed by UV radiation. Now that's a pretty strong statement, but they were killed with heat. So 42 degrees is pretty freaking hot for us. Probably unsurvivably hot, but it's also unsurvivably hot for the bacteria. So and there's other ways to kill these guys. So this was rife in 1920s or so. And you'll see on the right over there, the bottom two right frequencies. So those are the frequencies. These are Rife's actual frequencies, Rife after he partnered with an electrical engineer. But those are the two frequencies that supposedly they found would pop these little cancer environs and kill and abate cancer. He did very successfully do this. Now, Rife was a layman. He was very easy to poo-poo. The American Medical Association just completely destroyed this guy. Really sad. I mean, bankrupted him. I think he ended up dying in Mexico, maybe. But he is remembered. I will make sure this guy is remembered in history, absolutely, because he solved cancer. He really did. Okay, so let me tell you about something called AMPK real quick. So if you ever heard what a chip talk before, you've probably heard about AMPK. And AMPK is the thing that we want to flip. It's the switch, literally, in cells that we flip when we go from a fed to a fasted state, or when our cells go from running on glucose to running on fats, or you can think of it as, anaerobic to aerobic, okay? So AMPK is a button that kind of does that. Phosphorylation of AMPK puts you in a fatty acid processing mode if you are a cell. Well, what does it have to do with P53? Well, it turns out if you push AMPK, you also push P53. So it's going to respond to metabolic stress. And this is super important as a treatment mechanism, or let's say a mechanism of action to look at as to how to reinitiate these cancer killing stuff that we have. So how do we get around this loop that the bacteria placed around P53? They've sort of fenced it in and put it in prison. Well, can we break it out of prison? Well, it turns out AMPK is a pretty good prison break strategy. So pushing AMPK pushes P53 in a little bit different mechanism than the cancer has hornswoggled, let's say. So it's a good strategy, and it's a strategy we use here. And again, it's according to testimonials, it's effective. So how do we kill cancer? Well, there's a lot of different ways, and you can think about this as pushing the AMPK button. So there's a lot of different ways to push that AMPK button. The biggest way, the easiest way, and the most important way is for you through behavior and diet. And again, if you can't it's like the wind, okay? This is the way I look at it. Sort of God engineered this system, this medical system that has to do with nature, and it's like the direction of the wind. I mean, you have a direction that you run in. I'll get to this in a second, but let me just kind of walk you through this. But the wind, important. So, there's these different strategies to kill cancer. So behavior and diet, absolutely the most important one. If you're not doing the behavior and diet strategy, the cannabis strategy will not be as effective If you're not doing the behavior and diet strategy, an anti-parasitic strategy will not be as effective. If you're not doing the behavior and diet strategy, a chemo and pharma strategy will not be as effective. If you are doing the behavior and diet strategy, all of these things will be more effective. And that's why it's so important to talk about. Okay, so with cancer and as to diet and behavior, well, first of all, cancer is a disease of amino acids. I mean, it eats amino acids. It sort of hijacks your cellular processes in this Warburg effect, and it eats your main amino acid called glutamine. It converts it to glutamate, and that's part of kind of how it eats and why it has such high energy needs. So, because it's running in the least efficient way it can possibly run, but it's a disease of amino acids. When you add sugar to your body, if you have cancer, again, you're just fueling the cancer. It's just, well, let's pour a little gas on the fire. It'll be fine. And you really don't want to do that. It's, you're not necessarily helping or hurting the loop, that you're in, but you're just fueling, you're allowing that cancer to grow and be fed, and we really don't want to do that. What we want to do is figure out strategies where we can starve it, right? So we can, basically kill it, so we want to kill it. Well, okay, so this is super important on diet and behavior, and this is what I'm talking about blowing with the wind. So again, every day, as we sort of entrain ourselves to the sun, as we do every day, your body goes through these different phases or wants to do different things. And our bodies are not so good at doing everything at once. We can kind of focus on one thing and do other stuff, but we need to focus on one thing, and we're really good at doing that. So our bodies will focus on certain areas throughout the day and kind of go through this logical progression of, stuff, right? So we might be building hormones or structurally repairing cells or building immune mediators or, doing all different kinds of stuff, but we're kind of building hormone stuff, moving to immune, moving to cellular structure, but it's not everything at once, okay? And every day you go through this nice little ballet or symphony of stuff. And again, it's always the same stuff at the same time. I use the example melatonin. If I give you melatonin at noon, it's not going to affect you because it's not time yet. Your receptors aren't open. If I give it to you at 8 o'clock at night, your receptors are open. Now it's going to affect you. So we go through this dance every day that's super important, and it's just, part of who we are and kind of how God designed us, if you will. The most disruptive thing that we do every day, the most harmful thing that we do to ourselves is eat. Okay? When you eat, you have to stop this symphony. You have to stop the ballet, you have to stop the music, and you have to focus in. Again, you can't do everything at once, so your body has to focus in on the meal that you just ate and deal with the meal. And it takes a lot of energy to do this. And again, at what cost? What happens? Your immune system goes down. Boop. Your 2 ways to fight cancer turn off. P53 and autophagy. When you eat, you turn them off. And you turn them off for 5 hours, okay? What else happens? Well, when you eat, your insulin goes up, your blood glucose goes up. Now, what does cancer eat again? We don't want blood glucose to go up at all. Our ketones go down. Ketones are what we use when we haven't eaten as glucose. Cancer can't eat a ketone. Cannot. Our metabolic rate goes down because we need to kind of go to sleep and deal with what we just ate. Anabolically, our protein synthesis goes up, our cholesterol synthesis goes up, our gluconeogenesis goes up, our de novo lipogenesis goes up. So we're not dealing with fats in it. We're sort of using our fats to build things, right? So when you're in a cellular process, this is kind of, you got to do this. You got to be able to build stuff. But as far as cancer and as far as our immune system, eating is not your friend, okay? So this is why we talk so much about fasting if you have cancer. So what happens if you're in a fasted state, so 5 hours after you eat? Well, first of all, you turn on 2 ways to kill the cancer, P53 and autophagy. So autophagy is the way you clean up mutated cells. P53 will directly kill the cancer. So you want those 2 guys on, and you want them on as long as possible during the day, right? So if you can eat, let's say in a 4-hour window, 5 hours of processing, that's 9 hours. You got 15 hours of those two guys being on. That's what we want, boys and girls. That's what we want. Now, look at this. Insulin goes down when we're in a fasting state. Our blood glucose, food, goes down. Ketones go up. They can't eat ketones, boys and girls, and that's what we want to be running our bodies on. Not glucose, but on ketones. The other thing that happens, autophagy goes up, which we talk about, gluconeogenesis goes up, and lipolysis. Now, by the way, when you start researching these gluco and lipo things, you're going to have to go to the dictionary a lot because they're not, let's just, in fasting, you're running on fats. You're still kind of running a little bit on glucose, but you're mainly running on fats. In a fed state, you're running on glucose, just like you do in cancer, okay? So you're kind of helping the cancer when you eat. So we want to minimize eating. Intermittent fasting is the way to go. Now, again, if you're eating all the time or eating more than 5 hours, you're always going to be in a fed state. How am I going to help you lower your blood glucose if you won't help me, by sort of blowing with the wind? Okay? So when I talk about blowing with the wind, that's what I mean. Every single strategy that we're going to talk about from here will work far better in a fasted state. Okay? So super important because, again, if we're in a fed state, stuff's just not going to work as well. Our bodies will be fighting us because our bodies are asleep and our immune system is down. In a fasting state, our bodies are with us. Our bodies are helping us. They're active. They're ready to go. Give us some stuff, Chip. We want to help you fight off this cancer. Okay? That's what we want. That's what we want. All right. So behavior and diet. Again, is there evidence to say that fasting, helps with cancer? Yes, absolutely. And you guys can satisfy yourself out there. I'll tell you real quick. And again, I will always recommend that someone intermittent fast. Always. And I mean, doesn't matter if you have cancer or not. We all should be intermittent fasting because this just helps our body so much. But depending on the severity of the cancer, I might recommend to you that you start fasting right now. And I mean, go on a multiple day fast. And the reason for this is it takes about 2 days, so about 48 hours, for you to burn through all your glucose, all kind of the circulating glucose that we have. And you still have glucose in your body, but it's locked up in triglycerides, and it's a different work mechanism, let's say. So it takes about 48 hours for you to burn through the circulating glucose. When you do, what happens is your body, because you have organs that want to run on, let's say, those quick fuels like glucose. So your brain wants to run on a quick fuel, your liver wants to run on a quick fuel, I think your kidneys want to run on a quick fuel. So what do when all the glucose goes away? Well, they start running on something called ketones, and they get way more efficient. Want to know why we only use 10% of our brain or whatever it is? Because we don't run it on ketones. We run it on glucose, okay? So we want to be running on ketones. It's clear to me that we eat way too much. Again, changing this is going to be hard. It's probably going to be generational, but we need to change this. But anyway, point of that and the whole rabbit hole down there with ketones is that 48 hours after our last meal, we will be running on ketones rather than glucose. Now, listen to this. Previous studies indicate that unlike healthy tissues, cancer cells are unable to effectively use ketone bodies for energy. Furthermore, ketones inhibit the proliferation and viability of cultured tumor cells. Okay? So if you fast for 48 hours, your cancer starts to die. It can't eat. It doesn't have anything to eat. Important, right? So depending on the severity of your cancer, again, if you're stage 4 and you've got that, 3 or 4 months out there, as sort of a, say goodbye to your family and all that, we need to fast. We need to go on a fasting journey because, again, it doesn't matter. There is a point of no return with cancer, but it ain't the 3 or 4 months to live. It's way closer than that. So, if you're out there and you've kind of gotten that death sentence, let's say, let's have a conversation because that isn't always the case. And again, we've seen a lot of these things turn around. So, All right, so cannabis. So if you decide you want to go the cannabis route and treat your cancer with cannabis, um, we're getting ready to start developing data around this because right now, if you're in the cannabis space, if you're a cannabis person, you know that this is working. I mean, if you own a dispensary, I mean, you can probably tell me how many cancer patients you have and how many of them have gone into remission, right? So this is working. I mean, cannabis works for cancer. There's no question about that. Why? Because THC pushes CB1, which pushes AMPK. So it's all about basically pushing that P53 button that AMPK will push, okay? So and cannabis does that. And pushing AMPK is the same thing as being in a fasted state. Now, you don't want to do that too much when you're in a fed state because you're creating oxidative stress. Those cells are trying to flip to running on fat, and it's not time for them yet. And so that causes stress. So we need to, again, there's times that will be advantageous for this. But just know that the reason that cannabis works is because it affects the CB1 neuroreceptor, which pushes AMPK, which pushes P53. And that absolutely is known to kill cancer. So we know this anecdotally from if you're paying attention in the cannabis market at all, it's just, people are recovering from cancer all over the place. But there's no data yet. And this is what frustrates me. It's like, I try to talk to some, New England Journal of Medicine people. Some will find that funny based on past phone calls. But New England Journal of Medicine people, we go talk to them, right? And there's, where's your data? It's like, well, it's everywhere. It's anecdotal, but it's, you can talk to these people. It's not science. Okay. Well, we're getting ready to do some science, friends, so we'll get some data. We'll satisfy the old New England Journal of Medicine folks pretty soon. And again, it won't be just with cannabis. It'll be with all these modalities. So other natural products. So you've probably heard, hey, my friend, took apple seeds and they recovered from cancer using apple seeds. Well, yeah, because cyanin hits CB1, which pushes AMPK. What else does this? Well, Restorol does this. So this is red wine. So if you want to know, why red wine might work or help with cancer. Now, all you cancer patients don't go out there and say, what? Chip said I could drink red wine? No, it's got sugar in it. Don't do that. But you can get the resveratrol, and again, you can take this as a supplement. This also pushes AMPK. It also helps with another genetic structure called sirtuins, which are, what kind of help us clean up DNA damage, which is, helpful with cancer. So resveratrol is super duper 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 good thing to take. And again, do others do this? Well, yeah. Turmeric does this. Curcumin and turmeric push AMPK, and this is why you get some my cancer really got better when I took turmeric. Okay, all these together again are blowing with the wind. That's what I'm talking about. Let's throw the kitchen sink at her, Billy. So that's what we're going to begin to start doing here in a kind of consultative way, and then also a supplement way at Neighborhood Nutrition. So we're going to turn up something called Treat the Cause pretty soon. We're going to go at this directly, and we're going to be loud and proud about it. We're going to be careful what we say because we are not medical and we can get in trouble, but we're going to go at it pretty hard. And, we obviously want to do this right and do this in a respectful way to those guys who would get us, be respectful of doctors. They've spent a long time being trained for their medical profession and not use words that they use. But again, we're going to be doing some cool stuff. Anti-parasitics. So I've actually been in the news in a story about the Edmond man who cured himself of cancer using fenbendazole, vitamin E, and CBD. I was part of a news story in that where I was asked if it was the CBD, and I said, no, it wasn't. CBD alone won't kill cancer. It will help with some of the symptoms, but it's not going to push AMPK, let's say. It might help with things around AMPK. What does push AMPK? Fenbendazole, which is what the guy was taking. So he was taking a dog dewormer. The bendazoles are what they call anti-parasitics, anti-helmetics. They're dewormers. They're anti-parasitics. And guess what? Because cancer is alive, it is a parasite, they work. They help with it. So ivermectin, we'll remember that from COVID days, which is another parasite that's alive. And again, ivermectin helps with that. So, but fenbendazole and menbendazole. So all of these guys will push that AMPK button and also help with cancer, okay? All right, so that's about it. So I do want to tell you guys about treat the cause, but let's just talk about kind of what cancer is. So, Rife found that cancer was bacteria. I am absolutely seeing that same thing. You can prove that about 100 ways from Sunday, in sideways ways. The fact that pharma isn't coming out with a microscope and saying, we've found that cancer is a bacteria. Again, they don't want to jeopardize their $100 billion model, do they? And by saying that cancer is something alive and something that we can see in a microscope and kill, rather than something mysterious that only they know about and that only they can treat, is not in their best interest. All right, how is cancer caused? A weakened immune system allows the bacteria to develop. So again, we go through constant phases of when we're really strong in our immune system or really weak in our immune system. When we're weak in our disease is about the immune system, guys. It's just about the strength of your immune system. If you have a weak immune system, you're going to have disease. That's just it. Because again, you're going to drop your shields. You're going to get infected. Bacteria are everywhere. Every time you take a breath, every time you move, every time you touch something, you're getting exposed to bacteria. If your immune system is low, they're opportunistic. They're going to invade you. They're going to infect you. They're going to take up a root. They're going to build a little home. And again, if it's cancer, it's going to be cancer. It's going to be in soft tissue. If it's in your immune system, it might be autism or other things. Disease will just be a manifestation of bacterial infection. And again, I'm seeing that 100 ways from Sunday. Metabolic syndrome is kind of something that we do to ourselves, but again, it still related to all this. Who's at risk for cancer? Everyone. If you have a weakened immune system, again, you're going to get cancer over time if you continue to drop your immune system. Now, let me ask you this. If you eat breakfast and you got this 5-hour reset, so when we eat breakfast, we drop our immune system and we've got no way to kill cancer. 5 hours need to pass before we turn all that stuff on. About the time we get to noon, when it's all turning back on, we eat lunch. And then about the time we get to 5 o'clock, when it's all turning back on, we eat dinner. And then we eat that snack right before we go to bed, right? So a lot of us always have a weakened immune system, and we're always super susceptible to cancer. How do you defend against this? Well, let's do things to bolster up the immune system, and guess what? Turmeric and all the things that we're talking about boost up the immune system because they push AMPK. But the biggest thing that you can do is intermittent fast. Again, fasting boosts your immune system, okay? All right, so things I can do for both cancer treatment, and prevention. Depending on the severity of the cancer, consider intermittent fasting for less aggressive cancers and consider immediate fasting for more aggressive cancers. Oh, I've got a weird character in there. Consider immediately starting antiparasitics. So again, if you have cancer, you need to be looking at the antiparasitics really hard. If your doctor won't prescribe them to you, and every doctor should, under right to try, call us. I can help you. But again, Southern Ag has fenbendazole. And again, it's the same for a dog as it is for you. These are proven to have high safety. So very high, not any real safety risk with these, as long as you don't just overdo it. And they work, right? So this has worked for anecdotally as many people as cancer has now. As many people as cannabis has now. The other thing that I would suggest is getting a medical marijuana card and following the FECO Playbook strategies. So again, all of these things combined, and then also, looking at supplementing with natural products, and we'll have some supplements out in and for Treat the Cause. So Treat the Cause will be a special silo within what we're doing that will be cancer focused, and we'll have special supplements that are, kind of focused more on the things that we think need to be done for your body to help your body heal the cancer over there. So anyway, that's about it for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed this version of Chip Talks. We'll continue to strip the bark off the pharma system, off the lies they want to tell you, and continue to tell you how you work, how you can manipulate your body, how you can do yourself, by your own behavior and own actions, sort of get to perfect health, or at least blow with the wind, right? So let's start heading that way. So anyway, see you guys. We'll see you next week for another exciting version of Chip Talks.